We are back to the usual. This one is probably going to be shorter, actually. And I know that's saying a lot considering these are usually short. But as I learned previously with Silverwing, when you're doing children's books made for younger children, the books go fast. So, funny story. We're doing The Secret of the Attic. A few weeks ago, so I still have some stuff at my parents' house, and among that are several of the books I bought at like book fairs, because book fairs were like the best things ever. Save all your money, circle all the books you want, order the ones that aren't the actual fair, like Scholastic books, great things. And so among the books that I got back was The Secret of the Attic. And while I was doing the quick research for like the author and the illustrators, apparently there was an attempt at a revival of the series in 2003. I didn't look into how that went. I can't imagine it went well since I haven't heard of it since. Like, I'm not in those circles anymore, and I'll get into what I mean by that. First of all, I'm not a small child anymore. But yeah. Also, I think this is going to be the first time that we've covered a formula fiction. And while most people say formula fiction and mean it in a derogatory way, I don't. I have less of a problem with formula fiction than I think most people do. I'm actually kind of fond of formula fiction. Is my... Okay, that is going. But yeah, so I'm fond of formula fiction in a weird way. We'll get into that in a bit. But so let's get started on The Secret of the Attic, and we can talk about this book. As per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I did not change that this is not a gaming stream. Hang on. Hang on. Oh no. There's gotta be a way to change that, right? Manage? Hang on, there's gotta be a way to do this. Stream settings, edit, entertainment, save. Okay, hopefully that fixed that. Sorry guys, we are not playing Final Fantasy. Okay. So now that that's all good, as per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I don't hold any of the rights, and I hope you enjoy. Sorry, I just realized the last thing I did. So this is The Secret of the Attic by Sherry Cooper Sinian? Sinekin? Sinekin? Ah. So, publishing details. This is the dead giveaway, by the way. This was published by Magic Attic Press in 1995. It is a part of a series. It's part of the Magic Attic Club. I find it really funny. I have the book in front of me. It says Magic Attic Press on it. I can go to the cover sheet. It all says Magic Attic Press. When you look online, more often than not it says Scholastic Press. And I'm like, okay, None of the things I'm looking at say that, but you could buy it at Scholastic Book Fairs. So I don't know if that's where it is. So this is the original cover. This is the cover I have. I'm very fond of it. The illustrations, so the cover illustration and the large illustrations inside. Oh, that says Scholastic on it. I just realized that illustration actually says Scholastic on it. Mine does not. And that is not the ISBN I have either. Huh. Interesting. Anyway. The illustrations, which are the full-page illustrations and the covers, are by Ed Taddeo. He is an artist and illustrator who has done both fine art, which is most of his post-novel book cover illustrations has been fine art, and he's also, before he did book covers, he did like promotional work for companies. Like he did like JCPenney's promotional illustrations. And he's illustrated over 200 book covers. I found it really funny because when you see, oh, he's illustrated over 200 book covers, he did the Magic Attic books. What else has he done? A lot of romance covers. Think of your most stereotypical romance cover. He's done them. And those kind of covers were the kind that actually used models. So yeah. And then the spot illustrations, which are the smaller illustrations inside the book, are by Rich Grotti? Which I think I found him, but I couldn't find any information about him. And the Magic Attic illustrations weren't included. But I know that this is the name because it's inside the book. So about the author. The author is Sherry Cooper Sinekin. She's an American author who wrote 8 of the Magic Attic books, mostly Heather's, we'll get into that in a second, as well as other books for young readers. So I know her from the Magic Attic books. I haven't heard of any of the other ones that she wrote, but she did write other things. So what do you need to know about this? This is children's formula fiction. It is historical fiction. It's time travel-ish, and dolls. Despite the fact that there are 4 categories here, this is going to go very quickly. So let's start with the elephant in the room that's going to come up with the dolls. But, well, do I want to bring it up now? No, we'll bring it up at the end. We'll bring it up at the end. But, So your main characters, you have Heather Harden, who is the artist. Everybody's 10, by the way. Pokemon rules, everyone's 10. Allison McCann, Megan Ryder, and Keisha Vance. If I remember correctly, later in the series you get a 5th girl. But to start off, you have these 4. At least for the first 12 books. 12? 13? 12 or 13 books, you've only got 4. And so the reason I have these out to the side, the artists like sports, like stories and plays, like photography and singing, will come into play a little bit later, but to give you a vibe for this book, and the reason I said that this is going to be spoilery is there's no way to tell you the gimmick without spoiling the plot. This is the establishing book for the series. These interests come up in the rest of the series, less so in this book. So let's get into that. This is a formula fiction. While this book is the setup for the whole series, it gives you the formula. There's a problem in the real world. You go on a Magic Attic adventure. You go home and you solve your real world problem with what you learned in the attic. The problem in this book is not a problem. But the problem in this book is that Heather is new. And everybody is having a Christmas tree decorating thing and sharing ornaments, and she doesn't have an ornament. This does not sound like a problem. That's okay. Please remember, all the girls in this are 10. This is life or death. And so they go on the Magic Attic adventure, and you find out that Heather is Jewish. Keisha celebrates Kwanzaa. I don't remember what Megan's deal is. And then Ashley is your sporty blonde girl. Megan may just be a redhead. If I'm remembering right, that's the quote-unquote weird thing about Megan. Yeah. But so there's your formula. You go on the adventure in the attic, you come home, problem solved. So the problem was she's new and didn't want to tell everybody that she didn't have an ornament. Goes on the adventure, tells them that she's Jewish. They come back and they're like, yeah, we don't care, come anyway and have fun and party with us. And the day is saved. So about this Magic Attic. This is a historical fiction. Some books are more historical than others. They're all viewed through that lens. There is a dress-up trunk and wardrobe in the attic, and there is a mirror. And the gimmick for this whole series is the girls dress up and look in the mirror, and the lights get kind of shimmery. And then when they stop being shimmery, they are in another time that matches the era of the clothes they're wearing. So when I say things are more historical, sometimes they're wearing older clothes. Sometimes they've only gone back like 50 years. Depends on the adventure. Also, these are all set in, like, modern day, and I'm pretty sure modern day is still the 90s. Hang on, where's their comment? Hang on, I gotta get to where they realize that they're in a different... Oh, right. Also, after they do their time travel shimmery thing, their clothes usually changes slightly into more fitted and better versions of what they were dressed up as. Hang on. Where is the... Oh, yeah. This is in the 1930s. So it's roughly 60 years before it's set, because I think it's set in the 90s. So yeah, historical fiction. Time travel. So these two things are married, but I couldn't think of a fourth point, so I separated them. So they are all time travel books. Some of them, like this first one, the time travel element deals with meeting someone that the girls actually know. In this case, it's the owner of the Magic Attic. Sometimes it's meeting their ancestors. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with them. They've just traveled to a different time. And sometimes place. Actually, frequently they travel to a different place as well as time. But there's a handful of books that are called S books. I'll explain this in a second. There's a handful of books called S books that deal with the secret of the attic, which is what the S is for. And they almost always take place in the hometown that the girls are in, and usually deal with either the girls' family or the owner of the attic's family. Clear as mud? Cool. So now for the elephant in the room. Welcome to the alternative to American Girl dolls. complete with really pretty sets of clothes that were never quite as nice as the illustration. The illustrations in these books are fire. They are gorgeous. The art is highly detailed and whimsical, and like the flowy dresses look flowy. The actual doll clothes were never as nice as the illustrations. This is very much we picked an illustrator because illustrations are good, as opposed to American Girl, where the illustrations were what the doll clothes exactly looked like. So that is the crux of this series of the Magic Attic Club books, is that they are designed to sell dolls. Originally there were the 4. And if you look on the spines, it would either be S, which meant the secret of the Attic Club. It meant the whole club. Or it would have the initial of the girl, so H or M or K or A. And I don't remember what the 5th girl's letter was, but it had to be a different letter and it couldn't be an S. And so when I say that this author wrote mostly Heather's books, I think she wrote this one, I think Return to the Attic, or The Problem with the Attic. There's one where something goes wrong. I think she wrote one of the Ashley ones, but mostly she wrote Heather. So other authors wrote the stories for the other girls. I'm pretty sure the illustrators were all the same, because I remember all of them having great illustrations. But yes. So this is the counterpart to American Girl dolls. So when I said I'm not in this space anymore, not only am I not, 7 to 10, so this is not aimed at me at all, nor am I still buying American Girl doll style dolls and clothes. Did I have an American Girl doll as a kid? Absolutely. Was it one of the named ones? No, it was not. It was a build your own. Did it have a very late 80s, early 90s outfit as a build your own? Absolutely it did. Yes it did, because that's what the build your owns came with. They typically came with some popular clothes from roughly the time when you bought it. So I had like the denim jacket with a ton of pins, but then I had the very 80s hat that was also like in Full House, and like, so still television that was on in the 90s. But not something I would ever wear. But I will say this, the Magic Attic, because they were going back in time to like Russian ballet or riding, or there was a tightrope one, there was a figure skating one, I don't remember most of Keisha's. I read all of them, but like, I don't remember hers. And that's nothing against her. It's probably I didn't like the outfits as much. But the nice thing about the Magic Attic and the American Girl doll was, I think the American Girl dolls, I want to say one of them could wear the other's clothes, but not vice versa. And I want to say the American Girl dolls could wear the Magic Attic clothes, but not the other way around. I think. But yeah, they were the soft body dolls with the hard head and arms and legs. Didn't really have much joints or bend to them. So, recommendations. Children's formula fiction. welcome to the fun fact with children's formula fiction. Most of it's mysteries. So Hank the Cowdog by John R. Erickson. This is... How do I explain this? It is a mystery novel, but it's from the perspective of a dog solving a mystery around the ranch. So he is a working dog, and yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's animals talking to other animals type story. I really liked Hank the Cowdog. You have The Boxcar Children by Gertrude Chandler Warner. This was a bunch of orphans who, I can't remember why they ran away and lived in a boxcar. It's been a long time since I've read The Boxcar Children, but they ran away and lived in a boxcar and then were found by their uncle? Grandfather? The equivalent of Alfred Pennyworth found found them and adopted them, and because they missed the boxcar where they had sort of been living by themselves for a while in not great conditions, he moved the whole boxcar onto his property so they could still have it to play in. They also solved mysteries around towns. Like, all of these are mysteries. I don't know why children's formula fiction is, like, all mysteries. And the Babysitter's Club and the Magic Treehouse, but I didn't read either of those. So now for your caveats. The Hardy Boys by Franklin W. Dixon and Nancy Drew by Carolyn Keene. I didn't read these. I read one Hardy Boy novel because it was about birds of prey. And jewelry, if I remember correctly. It had both in it. Cry Sister read a lot of them. Cry Sister read all of them she could get her hands on. These are still being published today, and I would like to point out, neither of these people are real people. Franklin W. Dixon and Carolyn Keene are not real people. They are ghost-written. There have been many, many authors for these books over the years. They are ghost-written under that name. And that's kind of normal. Like, it's just kind of a, like, I don't expect the kids reading it to know it, but, like, yeah, the same names have been writing these books for decades. It's not the same authors. But yeah, so other things that fall under this, like I said, would be the Babysitter's Club, or the Magic Treehouse books, or stuff like that. For some reason, when I was Googling to make sure there was something other than these four, and there are, they put Poppy in here, but Poppy's really not formula fiction. Sorry, all of the Poppy books have independent stories in a way that these don't. Like, let's be real, if you've read one Boxcar Children, you've read them all. Benji's gonna be hungry. Just accept that. Hank the Cowdog, you're gonna get, like, at least 2 red herrings, and then everything's gonna get solved. So, yeah. So these are formula fiction. That's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with knowing the shape a story is gonna take. Like I said, the Magic Attic ones have a formula. Technically, so does American Girl. That could have gone on here too, because the formula for American Girl is meet name of girl, and it's a general introduction to her and her situation and her lifestyle. And then you have, like, a problem. So, like, you have meet Felicity, and then you have, oh gosh, what are Felicity's books? Hang on. Let me pull this up right quick so I make sure I'm explaining this correctly. So let me pull up American Girl books. Is it this one? How do they define? Ah, they've branched out. Okay. Oh, there's nothing weirder than seeing the books I've grown up with magically get new covers and new styles. Oh, these are not the book titles I grew up with. And I don't mean, I literally mean these are not the same books. Hang on. Where are hang on. I need to find the old ones so I can explain this properly. So, hang on. We're doing it this way. Not like that. We're going to do it this way. So, for example, Samantha, you have... I'm sorry, is that actually... Okay, it is. Okay, so you would have things like Meet Samantha. And then you had Samantha Learns a Lesson, which is a school story. And then you would have Samantha's Surprise, which is a Christmas story. And then you would have Happy Birthday Samantha, which is a springtime story. Samantha Saves the Day, which is a summer story. And Changes for Samantha, which is a winter story. Ah, yes. And then they randomly kept writing. Fantastic. Anyway, you have Meet Samantha, and then you have a school story, a Christmas story, a springtime story, a summer story, and a winter story. And then you would have, like, Kirsten. And you would have Meet Kirsten, and then you would have a school story, a Christmas story, a springtime story, a summer story, and a winter story. They might all have a different name. Learns a Lesson, Surprise, Saves the Day, Changes, like, but the subtitle was the same for all of them. That's how American Girl functioned. You could read all about one of them for like 6 books, and it would be the same 6 general topics. That's not how the Magic Attic worked. So the Magic Attic is like, is a little more individual, and so it's not the same story for each girl, if that makes sense. So, again, formula fiction. That's a different kind of formula fiction, I'll grant you that, but it's still formula fiction. There is a formula to it. And then apparently they kept writing books about Samantha, and they don't fit the formula anymore, and I'm very confused by that. Sorry guys, I'm old, apparently. So recommendations for children's historical fiction. Yes, most of these are girl books. I'm very sorry. So you have the American Girl books. I do recommend them for children's historical fiction. Are they perfect? No. Do they give a nice snapshot? Yes. The Royal Diaries books. These are a scholastic series by various authors that are fictional accounts of actual people. I'm partial to Cleopatra VII and Mary Queen of Scots. Those were always my favorites, but they also had, like, Anastasia. So it was various actual royal ladies, and it was a fictional diary for them. Like, I think Marie Antoinette had one, too. Nobody's Princess by Esther Frazier. This is for older kids, but it still falls into kids. It is the one about, Helen. Like, what is that woman's name? Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. This is, Nobody's Princess and Nobody's Prize are both about her. Then you have, she has a set about, Empress Himiko. They have a set about Queen Mav. They have a set about Nefertiri. And then The Secret of the Lost Colony by Rebecca Price Janney. And this one is on here because I'm pretty sure that this is the book that my sister owned that I lost because I loaned it out to a teacher, and I'm pretty sure that teacher never returned it. And I really should look into getting another copy of this book and get it for my sister. But it is a trilogy, I think. I don't think there were ever more than 3, which is really weird. And also, we only own, or she only owned, let's be real, I didn't own any of them. She only owned 2 out of the 3. So she owned The Lost Colony and Loch Ness, and I think The Lost Colony is the one that's lost. So that's ironic. And also, the covers I can find online are not the covers that she has. Thanks, Scholastic Book Fair. But yeah, so that is what I had for today. Like I said, it was super quick. But yeah, I don't have a problem with formula fiction and stuff. I know there are people who hate formula fiction, and I can respect that. Everybody's allowed to feel the way they feel about formula fiction. Where did... Everyone can feel their feelings about formula fiction. I don't mind. However... I don't mind formula fiction. So I don't read a lot of formula fiction as an adult because most things that fall under formula fiction... Oh, I am... Sorry, guys. My tracking's a little weird. Hang on. There we go. Most things that fall under formula fiction are romance and mysteries, and I'm not fond of either of those. But that being said, I don't hate formula fiction. I have read formula fiction. It's fine. I am a huge proponent that not all art has to be fine art. It's fine, actually, if some books are easier to read than others. It's fine and acceptable and necessary because every book has a reader, but not every reader is for every book, and that's perfectly fine. I really wish we would stop insisting that everyone has to like everything. And I wish that... Yeah, that's the big part. I wish people would stop thinking that everyone has to like every book. Every book is not for every person. Now, could some books be for more people than others? Sure. But look, I'm going to drag out the old argument. Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia, excluding the last battle for reasons, are for... There is overlapping audience, but there are people who will like Narnia that won't like Lord of the Rings, and vice versa. Some of those people were Tolkien. There are people who find the talking animals to be silly, and then there are people who are like, yeah, no, talking animals is fine, actually. As someone who read a lot of Redwall and still will reread Redwall, talking animals are fine. I'm good with that. I'm also good with books where the animals are animals. So Misty of Chintatig, Sea Star, The Black Stallion. Books that aren't about horses. Where the Red Fern Grows, Old Yeller, those kind of books. Books where the animals are kind of the main point, but also the animals are animals. Although you could argue the Black Stallion, Alec is also the main point. But anyway, point being, Alec Ramsey aside. Um, not all every book has to be for everybody. The people who like the Warrior Cats books and the people who like Where the Red Fern Grows do not have to be the same people. Like, yeah, they both have animals. Yeah, they both have like woods and areas of low population and wild animal fights and stuff. But like they're not really written for the same people. Other than children, but like that's a broad category. And hey, guess what? If all adults aren't the same, kids are not the same at all. Kids are more picky than adults. Adults will read things they don't like. Kids will not, usually. Kids will just stop. Unless they're weird like me, and if I start a book, I will finish it because I feel bad if I stop partway through, no matter how much I hate the thing. Unless it's like nonfiction. And then why am I reading that? But yeah. That is basically it. Wow, this is a very short stream. Okay. I can go grab poetry or like fairy tales if you want that. Or we could play some Final Fantasy, but I feel like I don't want to do that. Give me a second. Let me go grab some fairy tales. Okay, I'm back. I was staring at Salamander Strawn going, that's not a fairy tale. Hans Christian Andersen was right next to it. Okay, so I know we've done some of these. Let's do something new. Let me flip through and see what we've got. Let's see. We've done Thumbelina. We've done the Brave Tin Soldier. Do we want to do the Ugly Duckling? Let's do the Ugly Duckling. All right. So all of these are Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. So let's go. We're doing the Ugly Duckling. It was lovely summer weather in the country, and the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks piled up in the meadows looked beautiful. The stork walking about on his long red legs chattered in the Egyptian language, which he had learned from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was indeed delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse, close by a deep river, and from the house down to the water side grew great burdock leaves, so high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. The spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for the little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks and sit under a burdock leaf to have gossip with her. At length, one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Peep, peep, quack, quack," said the mother. Then they all quacked as well as they could, and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked, because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks, when they found out how much more room they had now than while they were inside the eggshell. "Do you imagine this is the whole world?" asked the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond to that parson's field, but I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising. "No, I declare the largest egg lies still there. I wonder how long this is to last. I am quite tired of it." And she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, how are you getting on?" asked an old duck who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break, but just look at all the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are all the image of their father, who is so unkind he never comes to see me." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the duck. "I have no doubt it is a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I could not get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yes, that is a turkey's egg. Take my advice. Leave it where it is, and teach the other children to swim." "I think I will sit on it a little while longer," said the duck. "As I have sat so long already, a few days will be nothing." "Please yourself," said the old duck, and she went away. At last the large egg broke, and the young one crept forth, crying, "Peep, peep." It was very large and ugly. The duck stared at it and exclaimed, "It is very large and not at all like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey. We shall soon find out, however, when we go to the water. It must go in if I have to push it myself." On the next day the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves, so the mother duck took her young brood down to the water and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack!" she cried, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily, with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible. And the ugly duckling was also in the water, swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "that is not a turkey. How well he uses his legs, and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly. Quack, quack, come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard, but you must keep close to me, or you may be trodden upon, and above all, beware of the cat." When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. Two families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, whetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself. "Come now, use your legs and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all, and has Spanish blood, therefore she is very well off. Don't you see she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand and a great honor for a duck? It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized both by man and beast. Come now, don't turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother, in this way. Now bend your neck and say quack." The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other ducks stared and said, "Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here." And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said the mother. "He is not doing any harm." "Yes, but he is so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck, "and therefore he must be turned out." "The others are very pretty children," said the old duck, with the rag on her leg. All but that one. I wish his mother could improve him a little." "That is impossible, your grace," replied the mother. "He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well or better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." Then she stroked his neck and smoothed his feathers, saying, "It is a drake, and therefore not so much of consequence. I think he will grow up strong and be able to take care of himself." "The other ducklings are graceful enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you bring it to me." And so they made themselves comfortable, but the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all, and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry. "He is too big," they said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail and flew at the duckling, and became quite red in the head with passion, so the poor little thing did not know where to go, and was quite miserable because he was so ugly and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day till it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him. They would say, "Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you." And his mother said she wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet. So at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the palings. "They are afraid of me because I'm ugly," he said, so he closed his eyes and flew still farther until he came to a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them and was polite as could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some water on the moor. After he had been on the moor 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg long and were very saucy. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling, "you are so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here is another moor, in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It is a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." Pop, pop, sounded in the air, and 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes. The water was tinged with blood. Pop, pop, echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor. Some were even seated on branches of trees overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke of guns rose like clouds over the dark trees, and as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head and hid it under his wing. At the same moment a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, and his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing sharp teeth, and then, splash, splash, went into the water without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and gun after gun fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing did not dare move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it could not decide which side should fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no further, and he sat down by the cottage, and then noticed the door was not quite closed in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was, therefore, a narrow opening in the bottom large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in the cottage. The tomcat, whom the mistress called my little son, was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr and even throw out sparks from his fur if it were stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs and was called Chickie Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she were her own child. In the morning the strange visitor was discovered, and the tomcat began to purr and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking around the room. But her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize! I hope it is not a drake, for I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now the tomcat was the master of the house, and the hen the mistress, and they always said, "We in the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue." "Can you raise your back and purr, or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door, and then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he could not help telling the hen. "What an absurd idea!" said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "But it is so delightful to swim on the water," said the duckling, "and it is refreshing to feel it close over your head when you dive down to the bottom." "Delightful indeed," said the hen. "Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He is the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water or dive under it, for I will not speak my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she. Do you think she would like to swim or let water close over your head?" "You don't understand me," said the duckling. "We don't understand you. Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room and in a society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your own good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but the proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible." "I believe I must go out into the world again," said the duckling. "Yes, do," said the hen. And so the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns crying croak, croak. It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just after the sun set amid the radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen any like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks, while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they mounted higher and higher in the air, the ugly duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened himself. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived in under the water and rose again, almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of those birds, nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he never felt for any other bird in the world. And he was not envious of those beautiful creatures, but wished to be as lovely as they. Poor ugly creature! How gladly he would have lived even with the ducks had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder, and he was obliged to swim out on the water to keep it from freezing. But every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep space from closing up. He became exhausted at last and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature, but when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him harm, and started in terror and fluttered into the milk pan and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more, and he flew first into the butter cask and then the meal tub and out again. What condition was he in? The woman screamed and struck at him with tongs, and the children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in efforts to catch him. But luckily he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling had endured during the hard winter, but when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor among the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining and heard a lark singing, and saw that all around was beautiful spring. And then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high in the air. They bore him onwards until he found himself in a large garden, before he well knew how it happened. The apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream which wound round a smooth lawn. Thanks, translation. That's not hard to say at all. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because I am so ugly and dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better be killed by them than pecked by ducks and beaten by hens and pushed about by the maiden who feeds poultry or starved with hunger in winter." And then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest in a farmyard is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. For the great swans swam round the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. In the garden presently came some little children and threw bread into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one." And the rest were delighted and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands and shouting joyously, "There's another swan come! A new one has arrived!" And then they threw more bread and cake into the water and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. And then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy, yet not at all proud. He had been the most beautiful of all the birds. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs unto the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. And then he rustled his feathers and curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, I never dreamed of such happiness as this, while I was an ugly duckling. I can probably do one more. Let's see. What else? What else do we want? That one's just less than a page. Let's not do that. Do we want The Little Mermaid? I don't think I've read that one yet. Let's do The Little Mermaid. Let's see. The Darning Needle. Soup. The Little Mermaid. Alright. So this is going to be the last story for today. Okay. The Little Mermaid. Far out in the ocean, where the water is blue as the prettiest cornflower and clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep indeed that no cable could fathom it. Many church steeples, piled one upon another, would not reach the ground beneath the surface of the water above. There dwells the Sea King and his subjects. We must not imagine that there is nothing at the bottom of the sea but bare yellow sand. No, indeed, the most singular flowers and plants grow there, the leaves and stems of which are so pliant that the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they had life. Fishes, both large and small, glide between the branches as birds fly among trees here upon land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. I'm going to have to set this book down. It is too big for me to hold and read. Its walls are built of coral, and its long Gothic windows are of clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as water flows over them. Their appearance is very beautiful, for in each lies a glittering purple. Purple? Pearl. Sorry, guys. A glittering pearl, which would be fit for the diadem of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very wise woman, and exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others, also of high rank, were only allowed to wear 6. She was, however, deserving of very great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her granddaughters. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long they played in the great halls of the castle or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and fish swam in just as swallows fly into our houses when we open the windows, excepting that the fishes swam up to the princesses and ate out of their hands and allowed themselves to be stroked. Excuse me. Outside the castle, there was a beautiful garden in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers, blossoms like flames of fire. The fruit glittered in gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was fine as sand, but blue as the flames of burning sulfur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if it were surrounded by the air from above, through which the blue sky shone, instead of the dark depths of the sea. In calm weather, the sun could be seen, looking like a purple flower with the light streaming from the calyx. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flower bed into the form of a whale, another thought it better to make hers the figure of a little mermaid, but that of the youngest was round like the sun, and contained flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, and while her sisters would be delighted with wonderful things which they obtained from the wrecks of vessels, she cared for nothing but her pretty red flowers, like the sun accepting a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy, carved out of pure white stone which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. She planted by the statue a rose-colored weeping willow. It grew splendidly and very soon hung fresh branches over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The shadow had a violet tint and waved to and fro like the branches. It seemed as if the crown of the tree and the root were at play and trying to kiss each other. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of ships and towns and people and the animals. To her it all seemed the most wonderful and beautiful to hear that flowers of the land should have fragrance, and not those below the sea, that trees of the forest should be green, and the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was a pleasure to hear them. Her grandmother called the little birds fishes, or she would not have understood her, for she had never seen birds. When you have reached your 15th year, said the grandmother, you will have permission to rise up out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships are sailing by, and then you will see both forests and towns. In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15. But as each was a year younger than the other, the youngest would have to wait 5 years before her turn came to rise up from the bottom of the ocean and see the earth as we do. However, each promised to tell the others what she saw on her first visit, and what she thought was the most beautiful. For their grandmother could not tell them enough. There were so many things on which they wanted information. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest, she who had the longest time to wait, and was so quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window looking straight up through the dark blue water, watching the fish as they splashed about with fins and tails. She could see the moon and stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew it was either a whale swimming overhead or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. As soon as the eldest was 15, she was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean, and when she came back she had hundreds of things to talk about, but the most beautiful, she said, was to lie in the moonlight on a sandbank in the quiet sea near the coast, and to gaze on an overly large town nearby, where the lights were twinkling like hundreds of stars, to listen to the sounds of the music, the noise of carriages, and the voices of human beings, and then to hear merry bells peal out from church steeples, because she could not go near to all those wonderful things. She longed for them more than ever. Oh, did not the youngest sister listen eagerly to all these descriptions? And afterwards, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city with its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and swim about where she pleased. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold, while violet and rose-colored clouds, which she could not describe, floated over her, and still more rapidly than the clouds flew a large flock of wild swans towards the setting sun, looking like a long white veil across the sea. She also swam towards the sun, but it sunk in the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds in the sea. The third sister's turn followed, and she was boldest of them all. She swam up a broad river that emptied itself into the sea, and on the bank she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines, Palaces and castles peeped out from amid proud trees of the forest. She heard birds singing, and rays of the sun were so powerful that she was obliged to often dive down under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek she found a whole troop of little human children, quite naked, and sporting about in the water, and she wanted to play with them, but they fled in a great fright, and then a little black animal came to the water. It was a dog, but she did not know that, for she had never seen one, and the animal barked at her so terribly that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. But she could never forget the beautiful forest, or the green hills, the pretty little children who could swim in the water though they had not fishes' tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but she said it was quite as beautiful there as nearer to land. She could see for so many miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such great distance that they looked like seagulls, and the dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils till it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what others had not seen the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating around each other like pearls, she said, but larger and loftier than churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes, and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself upon the largest, and let the wind play with her long hair, and she remarked that all the ships sailed by rapidly, and steered far away as they could from the iceberg, as if they were afraid of it. Towards evening, as the sun went down, dark clouds covered the sky, and thunder rolled and lightning flashed, and the red light glowed on the icebergs as they rocked and tossed on a heaving sea. On all the ships sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while she sat calmly, floating on the iceberg, watching the blue lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. When first the sisters had permission to rise to the surface, they were each delighted with the new and beautiful sights they saw. But now, as grown-up girls, they could go when they pleased, and had become indifferent about it. They wished themselves back again in the water, and after a month had passed, they said it was much more beautiful down below, and pleasanter to be at home. Yet often in evening hours the 5 sisters would twine their arms around each other, and rise to the surface in a row. They had the most beautiful voices. They had more beautiful voices than a human being could have, and before the approach of a storm, and when they expected a ship would be lost, they swam before the vessel and sang sweetly of the delights to be found in the depths of the sea, begging the sailors not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song. They took it for the howling of the storm, and these things were never beautiful for them. For if the ship sank, the men were drowned, and their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose arm in arm through the water in this way, their youngest sister would stay quite alone, looking after them ready to cry, only that mermaids have no tears, and therefore suffer more. "Oh, but were I 15 years old," said she, "I know that I should love the world up there and all the people in it." At last she reached her 15th year. "Well, now you are grown up," said the old dowager, her grandmother, "so you must let me adorn you like your other sisters." And she placed a wreath of white lilies in her hair. Every flower and leaf was half a pearl. And the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better. But she could not help herself, so she said farewell, and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had set just as she raised her head above the waves, but the clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water, with only 1 sail set, for not a breeze stirred, and the sailors sat idle on the deck amongst the rigging. There was music and song on board, and as darkness came on, 100 colored lanterns were lighted, as if the flags of all nations waved in the air. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then, as waves lifted her up, she could look through the clear glass window panes and see a number of well-dressed people within. Among them was a young prince, the most beautiful of all, with large black eyes. He was 16 years of age, and his birthday being kept with much rejoicing. The sailors were dancing on deck, but when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the air, making it as bright as day. The little mermaid was so startled she dived under water, and when she again stretched out her head, it appeared as if all the stars in heaven were falling around her. She had never seen fireworks before. Great suns of spurted fire and splendid fireflies flew into blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, even the smallest rope, could be seen distinctly and plainly. And how handsome the young prince looked as he pressed the hands of all present and smiled at them while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns had been extinguished, and no more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon ceased firing. But the sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still, the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down in the water, which enabled her to look in. And after a while, the sails were quickly unfurled, and the noble ship continued her passage. But soon waves rose higher, and heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more sails were reefed, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountains high, as if they would have overtopped the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them, and then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. To the little mermaid this appeared a pleasant sport. Not so to the sailors. At length the ship groaned and creaked. Thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as it broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed. The ship lay over on her side, and water rushed in. The little mermaid now perceived the crew were in danger. Even she herself was obliged to be careful to avoid beams and planks of the wreck, which scattered on water. At one moment it was so pitch dark that she could not see a single object, but a flash of lightning revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board excepting the prince. When the ship parted, she had seen him sink into the deep waves, and was glad, for she thought he would now be with her, and then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water. So when he got down to her father's palace, he would be quite dead. But he must not die. So she swam about among the beams and planks which strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they could crush her to pieces. And then she dived deeply under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, till at length she managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power of swimming in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him, and his beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had not the little mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above water and let the waves drift them where they would. In the morning the storm had ceased, but the ship, not a single fragment could be seen. The sun rose up red and glowing from the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her garden, and she kissed him again and wished that he might live. Presently they came in sight of land, and she saw lofty blue mountains on which white snow rested, as if a flock of swans were laying upon them. Near the coast were beautiful green forests, and close by stood a large building. Whether a church or a convent she could not tell. Orange and citron trees grew in the garden, and before the door stood lofty palms. The sea here formed a little bay in which the water was quite still, but very deep. So she swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand. and there she laid him in the warm sunshine, taking care to raise his head higher than his body. Then bells sounded in the large white building, and a number of young girls came into the garden. The little mermaid swam further out from the shore and placed herself between some high rocks that rose out of the water, and then covered her head and neck with the foam of the sea so that her little face might not be seen, and watched to see what would become of the poor prince. She did not wait long before a young girl approached the spot where he lay. She seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment, and then fetched a number of people, and the mermaid saw that the prince came to life again, and smiled upon those who stood round him. But to her he sent no smile. He knew not that she saved him, and this made her very unhappy. And when he was led away into the great building, she dived down sorrowfully into the water, and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she would tell them nothing. Many an evening and morning did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen until they were gathered, and the snow on the tops of the mountains melt away. But she never saw the prince, and therefore she returned home, always more sorrowful than before. It was her only comfort to sit in her little garden and fling her arms round the beautiful marble statue which was like the prince. But she gave up tending to her flowers, and they grew in wild confusion over the paths of the whole place, twining their long leaves and stems around the branches of the tree. So the whole place became dark and gloomy. At length she could bear it no longer, and told one of her sisters about it. Then others heard the secret, and very soon it became known to the two mermaids, whose intimate friend happened to know who the prince was, as she had also seen the festival on board the ship, and she told them where the prince came from and where his palace stood. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses, and then they entwined their arms and rose up in a long row to the surface of the water, close by the spot where they knew the prince's palace stood. It was built of bright yellow shining stone, with long flights of marble steps, one of which reached quite down to the sea. Splendid gilded cupolas rose over the roof, and between marble pillars that surrounded the whole building stood lifelike statues of marble. Through the crystal clear of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry, while the walls were covered with beautiful paintings which were a pleasure to look at. In the center of the largest saloon, a fountain threw its sparkling jets high up into the glass cupola of the ceiling, through which the sun shone down upon water and upon beautiful plants growing round the basin of the fountain. Now that she was near the palace, she could swim much nearer to the shore than any of the others ventured to do, and indeed went quite up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which threw a broad shadow onto the water. Here she would sit and watch the young prince, who thought himself quite alone in the bright moonlight. She saw him many times of an evening, sailing in a pleasant boat, with music playing and flags waving. She peeped out from among green rushes, and if the wind caught her long silvery white veil, those who saw it believed it a swan spreading its wings. On many a night, too, when the fishermen with their torches were out at sea, she heard them relate so many good things about the doings of the young prince that she was glad she had saved his life when he had been tossed about half dead on the waves. And she remembered that his head had rested on her bosom, and how heartily she had kissed him, but he knew nothing of all this, and could not even dream of her. She grew more and more fond of human beings, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those the world seemed to be so much larger than her own. They could fly over the sea in ships, and mount the high hills which were far above the clouds, and the lands on which they possessed, their woods and their fields, stretched far away beyond the reach of her sight. And there was so much that she wished to know, and her sisters were unable to answer all of her questions. Then she applied to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world, which she very rightly called the lands above the sea. "If human beings are not drowned," said the little mermaid, "can they live forever? Do they die as we do here in the sea?" Or do they never die, as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady, they must die, and their term of life is shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we become the foam on the surface of the water. We have not a grave down here for those we love. We have not immortal souls. We shall never live again. But like the green seaweed when it has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives forever, and lives after the body has been turned to dust. It rises up through the clear, pure air, beyond the glittering stars, as we rise out of the water, and behold all the land of earth. So do they rise unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see. Why have not we an immortal soul? Said the little mermaid. I would give gladly all the hundreds of years I have to live to be a human being for only one day, and to have hope of knowing the glorious happiness of that world above the stars. You must not think of that, said the old woman. We feel ourselves to be much happier and much better off than human beings. So I shall die, said the little mermaid, and as the foam of the sea I shall be driven about, never again to hear the music of the waves, or see the pretty flowers, nor the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man were to love you so much that you meant more to him than his father or mother, and if all of his thoughts and all of his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share in that future happiness of mankind. He would give a soul to you and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which among us is considered so beautiful, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better. They think it is necessary to have 2 stout props, which they call legs, in order to be handsome. And then the little mermaid sighed, looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. Let us be happy, said the old lady, and dart and spring about in the 300 years we have, which is really quite long enough. After that, we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening, we are going to have a court ball. It is one of those splendid sights which we can never see on earth. The walls and ceiling of one large ballroom were of thick but transparent crystal, and many hundreds of colossal shells, some deep red, others grass green, stood on each side in rows, with blue fire in them which lighted up the whole saloon, and shone through the walls so the sea was illuminated. Innumerable fishes, great and small, swam past crystal walls. Some of them, their scales glowed with purple brilliancy, on others silver and gold. Through the halls flowed a broad stream, and in it danced the mermen and the mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. No one on earth has such a lovely voice as theirs, and the little mermaid sang more sweetly than them all. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails, and for a moment her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she had the loveliest voice of any on earth or in sea. But she soon thought again of the world above her, for she could not forget the charming prince, nor her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. Therefore she crept away silently out of her father's palace, and while everything within was gladness and song, she sat in her own little garden, sorrowful and alone, and then heard the bugle sounding through the water, and thought, he is certainly sailing above, and on whom my wishes depend, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I would venture all for him, and win an immortal soul while my sisters are dancing in my father's palace. I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been so much afraid, and she can give counsel and help. And then the little mermaid went out from her garden, and took the road to the foaming whirlpools behind which the sorceress lived. She had never been that way before. Neither flowers nor grass grew there. Nothing but bare, gray, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where water, like foaming mill wheels, whirled round everything it seized, and cast it into the fathomless deep. Through the midst of these crushing whirlpools the little mermaid was obliged to pass, to reach the dominions of the sea witch. And also, for a long distance, the only road lay right across a quantity of warm and bubbling mire, called by the witch her turf moor. Beyond this stood her house in the center of a strange forest, in which all the trees and flowers were poplii, half animals, half plants, and they looked like serpents with 100 heads growing out of the ground, and the branches were long slimy arms with fingers like flexible worms, moving limb after limb from root to top. All that could be reached in the sea they seized upon and held fast so that never escaped from their clutches, and the little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear, and she was very nearly turning back. But she thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. And she fastened her long flowing hair round her head so the poplii might not seize it. And she laid her hands together across her bosom, and then darted forward as a fish shoots through water, between supple arms and fingers of ugly poplii, which were stretched out on either side of her. And she saw that each held in its grasp something it had seized with its numerous tiny arms, as if they were iron hands. The white skeleton of human beings who had perished at sea and had sunk down into deep waters, and skeletons of land animals, of oars and rudders and chests of ships, were lying tightly grasped in their clinging arms. And even a little mermaid who they had caught and strangled, and this seemed the most shocking of all to the princess. Now she came to a space of marshy ground in the wood, where large fat water snakes were rolling in the mire, and showing their ugly drab-colored bodies in the midst of this spot stood the house, built with bones of shipwrecked human beings, and there sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with a piece of sugar. And she called the ugly water snakes her little chickens, and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, and have two supports instead, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed loud and disgustingly, and the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and were wriggling about. "You are but just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draught for you, which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise, and sit down on the shore and drink it. Your tail will disappear and shrink up into what mankind calls legs, but you will feel great pain as though a sword were passing through you. But all who see you will say you are the prettiest little human they ever saw. And you will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. But every step you take will feel as though you were treading upon sharp knives, and that the blood must flow. If you will bear this, then I will help you." "Yes, I will," said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. But think again," said the witch, "for when once your shape has become a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return to the water with your sisters or to your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget father and mother and join for your sake, and love you with his whole soul, and allow the priest to join your hands so that you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves." "I will do it," said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. "But I must be paid also," said the witch, "and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it also. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess I will have for the price of my draught. My own blood must be mixed with it, and it will be sharp as a two-edged sword." "But if you take away my voice," said the little mermaid, "what is left for me? Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, your expressive eyes. Surely with these you can enchain a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue that I may cut it off as payment, and you shall have the most powerful draught." "It shall be," said the little mermaid. And then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic draught. "Cleanliness is a good thing," said she, scouring the vessel with snakes which she had tied together into a large knot. She then pricked herself in the breast and let black blood drip into it, and the steam that rose formed itself into horrible shapes that none could look at without fear. And every moment the witch threw something else into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. "There it is for you," said the witch, and then she cut off the mermaid's tongue, so that she became dumb and would never again speak or sing. "If the poppy should seize hold of you as you return through the wood," said the witch, "throw over them a few drops of the potion, and their fingers will be torn into 1,000 pieces." But the little mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the poppy sprang back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering draught, which shone in her hands like a twinkling star. So she passed quickly through the woods and the marsh and between the rushing whirlpools, and she saw that in her father's palace the torches of the ballroom were extinguished, and all within asleep. But she did not venture to go into them, for now she was dumb and going to leave them forever, and felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the gardens and took a flower from the flower beds of each of her sisters, and kissed her hand 1,000 times towards the palace, and then rose up through dark blue waters. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace. She approached the beautiful marble steps, but the moon shone clear and bright. And then the little mermaid drank the magic draught, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body, and she fell in a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun arose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt sharp pain. But just before her stood the handsome young prince, and he fixed his coal-black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and she had a pretty pair of white legs and tiny feet as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, and so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. And the prince asked her who she was and where she came from, and she looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with deep blue eyes, but could not speak. And every step she took, as the witch had said it would be, she felt as though she were treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives, but she bore it willingly and stepped lightly by the prince's side as a soap bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful swaying motions. She was very soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace, but she was dumb and could neither sing nor recite. Beautiful female slaves dressed in silk and gold stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hand and smiled at her. This was a great sorrow to the little mermaid. She knew how much more sweetly she herself could sing, and once again she thought, if only he had known that. I have given away my voice forever to be with him. And the slaves next performed some pretty fairy-like dances to the sounds of beautiful music. And then the little mermaid raised her lovely white arms and stood on the tips of her toes and glided over the floor, and danced as no one had yet been able to dance. Each moment her beauty became more revealed, and her expressive eyes appealed more directly to the heart than the songs of the slaves. Everyone was as enchanted, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling, and she danced again quite readily to please him, though each time her foot touched the floor it seemed as if she trod on knives. And the prince said she should remain with him always, and received permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her that she might accompany him on horseback, and they rode together through sweet-scented woods where green boughs touched their shoulders and little birds sang among fresh leaves. She climbed with the prince to the top of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only laughed and followed him until she could see the clouds beneath them, looking like a flock of birds traveling to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold sea water. and when she thought of those below in the deep. One night, her sisters came up, arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her, and told her how she had grieved them, and that they all came to the same place every night, and once in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father, with his crown on his head. And they stretched out their hands towards her, but they did not venture as near to the land as her sisters did. As the days passed, she loved the prince more fondly, and he loved her as he would a little child, but it never came into her head to make her his wife. Yet, unless he married her, she could not receive the immortal soul, and on the morning of his marriage with another she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. "Do you not love me the best of all?" the eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say when he took her in his arms, and kissed her fair forehead. "Yes, you are dear to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple, where several young maidens performed the service, and the youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I can love. But you are like her, and you have almost driven her image out of my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and my good fortune has sent you to me instead of her, and we will never part." "Ah, he knows not that I was the one who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I carried him o'er the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and waited till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maiden that he loves better than he loves me." And the mermaid sighed deeply, but could not shed tears. "He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple, therefore she will never return to the world. They will meet no more, while I am by his side and see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and give up my life for his sake." Very soon it was said that the prince must marry, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife, for a fine ship was being fitted out. Although the prince gave out that he merely intended to pay a visit to the king, it was generally supposed that he really went to see his daughter. A great company were to go with him. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. "I must travel," he said to her. "I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would rather choose you, my dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes." And then he kissed her rosy mouth, and played with her long waving hair, and laid his head upon her heart, while she dreamed of human happiness and the immortal soul. "You are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child," he said, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. And then he told her of the storm and the calm, and of strange fishes in the deep beneath them, and what the divers had seen there. And she smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. In the moonlight, when all on board were asleep, excepting the man at the helm who was steering, she sat on the deck, gazing down through the clear water. She thought she could distinguish her father's castle, and upon it her aged grandmother with the silver crown on her head, looking through the rushing tide at the keel of the vessel. And then her sisters came up on the waves and gazed at her mournfully, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them and smiled and wanted to tell them how happy and well off she was. But the cabin boy approached, and her sisters dived down, and he thought it was only the foam of the sea which he saw. The next morning the ship sailed into harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king of whom the prince was to pay a visit. And the church bells were ringing, and from high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets, and soldiers with flying colors and glittering bayonets lined the rocks from which they passed, and every day was a festival, and balls and entertainment followed one after another. But the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she was being brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. And at last she came, and then the little mermaid, who was very anxious to see whether she was really beautiful, was obliged to acknowledge that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long dark eyelashes, her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. "It was you," said the prince, "who saved my life when I lay dead upon the beach," and he folded his blushing bride in his arms. "Oh, I am too happy," he said to the little mermaid. "All my fondest hopes are fulfilled. You will rejoice at your happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere." And the little mermaid kissed his hand, and felt as if her heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring the death of her, and she would change into foam of the sea. All the church bells rung, and the heralds rode out the town proclaiming the betrothal. Perfumed oil was burning in costly silver lamps on every altar, and priests waved censers while the bride and bridegroom joined their hands and received the blessing of the bishop. And the little mermaid, dressed all in silk and gold, held the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of festive music, and her eyes saw not the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death which was approaching her, and all that she had lost in the world. On the same evening the bride and bridegroom went on board a ship. Cannons were roaring, flags were waving, and in the center of the ship a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant couches for the reception of the bridal pair during the night, and the ship, with swelling sails and a favorable wind, glided away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of colored lamps were lit, and sailors danced merrily on deck. The little mermaid could not help but thinking of her first rising out of the sea, when she had seen similar festivities and joys, and joined the dance, and poised herself in the air as a swallow when he pursues prey, and all present cheered for her with wonder. She had never danced so elegantly before, and her tender feet felt as cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for it, for a sharper pain had pierced her heart, and she knew this was her last evening she would ever see the prince, for whom she had forsaken kindred and home, and had given up her beautiful voice, and suffered unheard-of pain daily for him, while he knew not of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him, or gaze upon the starry sky and deep sea. An eternal night without thought or dream awaited her, and she had no soul now which she could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on board the ship till long after midnight, and she laughed and danced with the rest, while the thoughts of death were in her heart. And the prince kissed his beautiful bride while she played with his raven hair, till they went arm in arm to rest in their splendid tent. And all became still on board the ship, and the helmsman alone, awake, stood at the helm, and the little mermaid leaned on her white arms over the edge of the vessel, and looked towards the east for the first blush of morning, for that first ray of dawn would bring her death. And she saw her sisters rising out of the flood, and they were as pale as herself, but their long, beautiful hair waved no more in the wind, and had been cut off. "We have given our hair to the witch," said they, "to obtain this for you, that you might not die tonight. She has given us a knife, and here it is. See, it is very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince, and when the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again and form a fish's tail, and you will once more be a mermaid and return to us to live out 300 years before you die and change into salt sea foam. Haste, then, he or you must die before sunrise. Our grandmother groans for you, and her white hair is falling off from sorrow, as ours fell from the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hasten, do you not see the first red streaks in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and you will die." And they sighed deeply and mournfully, and sank beneath the waves. And the little mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent, and beheld the fair bride with her head resting upon the prince's breast, and bent down and kissed his fair brow, and then looked upon the sky, which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. She glanced at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid. Then she flung it as far away from her into the waves, and the water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. And she cast one more lingering, half-fainting glance upon the prince, and threw herself from the ship into the sea. And though her body was dissolving into foam, the sun rose above the waves, and warm rays fell upon cold foam of the little mermaid, who did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright foam, and all around her floated hundreds of transparent, beautiful beings, and she could see through them the white sails of the ship and the red clouds of the sky, and their speech was melodious, but too ethereal to be heard by mortal ears, as they were also unseen by mortal eyes. And the little mermaid perceived that she had a body like theirs, and continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" asked she, and her voice sounded ethereal, and the voice of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. "Among daughters of the air," answered one of them. "A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the power of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can, by good deeds, procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool, sultry air that destroys mankind with pestilence, and we carry perfume of the flowers to spread good health and restoration. And after we have striven for 300 years to do all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part in the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are, and you have suffered and endured and raised yourself into a spirit world by good deeds, and now, by striving for 300 more years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul." And the little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes towards the sun, and felt them for the first time filling with tears. On the ship which she had left the prince, there was life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. And sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as though they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of her bride, and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud that flew through the ether. "After 300 years thus, we shall float into the kingdom of heaven," said she, "and we may even get there sooner," whispered one of her companions. "Unseen, we can enter the houses of men, where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child, who is the joy of his parents and deserves their love, the time of our probation is shortened, and the child does not know, when we fly through the room, that we may smile with joy at good conduct, for we can count 1 year less of our 300. But when we see a naughty or a wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow, and for every tear a day is added to our time of trial." And that's The Little Mermaid. Whose hair color is never mentioned, but she likes red flowers. Well, that's gonna be it for tonight. Thanks for dropping by. Hope all of you enjoyed. And I will see you next time.